we might be wise about some things, but stupid about other things. And so maybe it's fallacious thinking to just talk about a wise person in general.
Well, sometimes a wise person realizes what they don't know. I mean, that is a very important source of wisdom, I would say. So, sure, I mean, we're all stupid about some things and wise about others, but I think part of wisdom is knowing what you don't know and really resisting to using your own sense of confidence and certainty as evidence that you are right in some fundamental way.
But isn't there a distinction between wisdom and knowledge? So knowledge might be, we know some stuff, we don't know other things. Wisdom is presumably something deeper, right?
Well,
not necessarily deeper, but it's certainly different in character. That's why I want to go for this notion of wholeness and overall understanding. The wise person somehow knows how all the individual bits of information he or she has, which may not be a larger group than somebody else who's quite foolish, knows how all of that, in a sense, fits, and knows how to deal with it and use it practically in life. So when I set out here this evening, I was really foolish. I didn't realize that the rain would make the subways difficult, so I set out at the time that seemed right. And I hadn't thought, I hadn't reflected, and so I arrived here in a rush, right? Now, that showed a certain kind of inability, a certain falling short on my part, a failure of reflection. Now, Valerie, in her very important book on this, points out something that I think is terribly important, and that is that even the reflective person doesn't reflect all the time. A life in which we constantly reflected on what we were doing and subjected everything that we believed in and were committed to evaluation at every moment would be an intolerable life. So it's not just that you have to have a gift for reflection. You have to know what the important things are to reflect about and when it's important to reflect about them. And so there are lots of different ways in which all of us can fall short of wisdom. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think our lives, anybody's life, is an incredible motley. And that when you look at it, you'll find instances and contexts and ways in which they've fallen far short of wisdom. But we still think that some wise people get the whole right and they get the important bits right.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I want to go back to Aristotle. Because it sounded like we were leading in a direction where we were suggesting there is no one notion of wisdom, it can't be defined, it's too big. And there are some things I agree with about that tendency, but I also think there's a fairly core notion of practical wisdom, wisdom about action rather than wisdom about, physics or something. That is the same since Aristotle, and it is this idea that wisdom lets you comprehend what is important in life and lets you act in a way that's consistent with that. So and that makes it sound like I think there's just one definition of wisdom for everybody. But what I agree with is how that broad definition actually gets instantiated in a person depends tremendously on culture and individual differences
I
and
think
everything else.
that what you're doing, though, is you're making a distinction, which I think is a very valuable one, between process and content. So you're saying there's a process definition. I think we're all actually saying there's a process definition, but not really so much a content. It's not, if you know these 5 things, you're going to be really wise.
But just to go back to Emerson for a moment, I mean, Emerson would have hated your talk of consistency.
Right. He's not in
a
the
foolish
right,
exactly. I mean, and for him, the ability to be spontaneous, to be whimsical, to go in new directions, to defy the previous unity of your life is something that might be constitutive of a strong character, a good character, a character who is enjoying a valuable and rich life.
That doesn't necessarily sound like wisdom, though. That just sounds like, you know how to live well. You know how to cultivate new experiences.
Well, I'm not an expert on either Aristotle or Emerson, so of course I will just speak with confidence because I have a PhD.
But you actually know stuff.
But what I would say is, maybe they were both wise in the sense that they clearly had things that were meaningful to them, and other, they were prioritizing different end states, different goals, and enacting those goals, knowing how to use what you know and realize what you don't in order to get where you want to go is really the key, right? So I think my wisest moments are, to use a friend of mine's phrasing, when I think about future Lisa, not tomorrow, but 70 or 80-year-old Lisa, what will she be regretful about? What will she feel? Will she look back on her life and feel like, and I know this sounds really esoteric, but I actually do that. I actually try to simulate, what am I gonna, if I do this versus that, will I be regretful?
This is a great philosophical test. It goes back to Schopenhauer and to Nietzsche, and they ask, as you approach the end of your life, would you endorse it in the sense of being given the chance to do it all over again? Would you do it the same way? And here too, it seems to me you can raise questions. You can ask whether the view from the end is really the right one.
Sure.
Does that really have priority? You can imagine, we all know of people who lead what appear to be very rich and fulfilling lives, and then in the last weeks or months, they have a crisis of confidence, and they think of themselves as having wasted their lives.